One signature on a marriage contract. That was all it was supposed to be. I was a waitress drowning in debt. He was the devil in a three-piece Armani suit. I took a seat at the most dangerous table in New York City, pretending to be a wealthy heiress just to survive the week. I thought I could fool him. I thought I could walk away with the cash and disappear back into the shadows of the Bronx. But when Lorenzo Moretti looked at me, not with lust, but with terrifying recognition, and whispered, "You're mine," I realized I hadn't just walked into a blind date. I had walked into a war zone. The smell of stale beer and fryer grease clung to Hannah Russo's hair like a second skin. It was 2:00 a.m. in Hell's Kitchen, and the fluorescent lights of Sal's 24-hour diner buzzed with an irritating flicker that matched the migraine throbbing behind her left eye. Hannah scraped the last of the scrambled eggs off a plate into the trash, her mind doing the frantic arithmetic it always did at this hour. Rent was 3 days late. Her brother Marco needed bail money again, something about a botched car theft in Queens, and her mother's insulin. That price had hiked up again. She was 24 years old, and she felt 80. "Hannah, please, you have to do this. I'm begging you on my knees. Look, I'm actually on my knees in a diner. Is this not pathetic enough for you?" Hannah turned to see Isabella Vanchetti crouched on the checkered linoleum floor. Isabella was everything. Hannah wasn't the daughter of a sanitation magnate draped in silk that cost more than Hannah's car and currently sobbing into a napkin. "Get up, Izzy. You're scaring the drunks." Hannah sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "I told you I can't be you. We don't even look alike." "We do. In low light. We both have dark hair and eyes." Isabella scrambled up, gripping Hannah's forearms. Her manicured nails dug into Hannah's skin. "My father set this up, a blind date with the eldest son of the Moretti family. It's a merger, Hannah, not a date. If I don't go, Papa cuts me off. No credit cards, no apartment, nothing. But if I do go, I'm terrified. You know the rumors about the Morettis." Hannah stiffened. Everyone in New York knew the name Moretti. They didn't just run waste management. They ran the unions, the docks, and half the politicians in Albany. Lorenzo Moretti, the eldest, was a ghost story whispered in back alleys. They said he had ice water in his veins and blood on his hands. "You want me to sit across from a mobster so you can go to Cabo with your boyfriend?" Hannah asked incredulously. "I'll pay you," Isabella blurted out. Hannah paused. "I have a shift tomorrow. $5,000. Cash. Tonight." The diner went silent around them. $5,000. That was Marco's bail. That was 3 months of rent. That was insulin. Hannah looked at the scuff marks on her orthopedic waitress shoes. She looked at Isabella's terrified, pampered face. It was just a dinner. 1 hour. She would be boring, rude, and unappealing. The guy would reject her. Isabella would get to keep her trust fund, and Hannah would save her family. 10,000, Hannah said, her voice hard. 5 now. 5 when I walk out alive. Isabella didn't even blink. She reached into her Prada bag and pulled out a thick envelope. "Deal. The car is waiting outside. The dress is in the back." An hour later, Hannah Russo no longer existed. In her place was a vision in emerald green silk. Her calloused hands were scrubbed raw and covered with moisturizing gloves during the ride. Her hair was pinned up in a chignon that screamed old money. The car, a black Mercedes Maybach with tinted windows, glided through the streets of Manhattan, moving away from the grime of Hell's Kitchen toward the opulence of the Upper East Side. The destination was Il Segreto, A restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign, just a heavy oak door and a bouncer who looked like he ate concrete for breakfast. Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She clutched the envelope of cash in her purse. Just survive the appetizers, she told herself. Don't talk about the diner. Don't talk about Marco. Be Isabella Vanchetti, spoiled, vapid, and rich. The driver opened the door. The night air was cold, but sweat trickled down her spine. She stepped onto the pavement, the heels Isabella provided, clicking sharply against the stone. This was the point of no return. She walked into the restaurant, and the heavy door slammed shut behind her, cutting off the noise of the city. It felt less like entering a dining room, and more like entering a vault. Il Segreto was dark. The lighting was designed to hide sins and scars. The air smelled of truffle oil, aged leather, and expensive cologne. A maitre d' in a tuxedo that fit better than Hannah's entire wardrobe approached her with a stiff bow. "Signorina Vanchetti," he murmured. "Right this way. Signor Moretti is already seated." Hannah's stomach dropped. Being late was a power move, but arriving after the boss was a mistake. She followed the maitre d' through the labyrinth of tables. The clientele here wasn't just rich, they were powerful. She saw a senator dining with a union leader. She saw a judge laughing with a man whose mugshot had been on the news last week. They were led to a private alcove in the back, shielded by heavy velvet curtains. And there he was, Lorenzo Moretti. He didn't stand when she approached. He was leaning back in a leather chair, swirling a glass of deep red wine. He was younger than she expected, maybe 32, but his eyes looked ancient. They were the color of gunmetal, cold and assessing. He wore a black suit, tailored to perfection, straining slightly across broad shoulders. A small, jagged scar cut through his left eyebrow, the only imperfection on a face that was devastatingly handsome and utterly terrifying. "Sit," he said. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. Hannah swallowed the lump in her throat and sat. She smoothed the green silk over her legs, trying to stop her hands from trembling. "You're late, Isabella," Lorenzo said, his voice a low baritone that vibrated in her chest. He finally looked up from his wine-locking eyes with her. For a second, the air left the room. "Traffic," Hannah lied, channeling her best impression of Isabella's bratty tone. "The bridge was a nightmare. Daddy really needs to fix the infrastructure in this city if he wants me to be punctual." Lorenzo didn't blink. He didn't smile. He just watched her. It felt like being observed by a predator, deciding which artery to sever first. "Wine?" he asked, pushing the bottle toward her. "Barolo 96. Your father said it's your favorite." Hannah froze. She knew nothing about wine. She drank boxed Merlot when she could afford it. "I'm not drinking tonight. Detox. My yoga instructor insists." Lorenzo's lips twitched. A micro-expression. Amusement or suspicion. "A detox," he repeated slowly. "Interesting choice for a woman who was spotted doing shots at the Blue Velvet 2 nights ago." Hannah's blood ran cold. Isabella hadn't mentioned that. "I contain multitudes." She shot back, her defensive waitress reflex kicking in before she could stop it. "Are we here to discuss my drinking habits or the merger?" Lorenzo placed his glass down with a deliberate clink. He leaned forward, the candlelight catching the sharp angles of his jaw. "We are here," he said softly, "because your father owes my family a great deal of respect, and he thinks offering his daughter's hand will settle the debt. I am here to see if the payment is worth the trouble." Hannah felt a flash of anger. This wasn't a date. It was a transaction. She was livestock. Or rather, Isabella was. "I'm not a payment," Hannah snapped, dropping the vapid act for a split second. "I'm a person." Lorenzo stared at her. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating. He reached across the table. Hannah flinched, expecting a strike, but he merely took her hand. His skin was rough, calloused, not the soft hands of a CEO, but the hands of a man who worked, who fought. He turned her hand over, running his thumb over her palm. Hannah held her breath. Her hands were her betrayers. They were rough from scrubbing dishes, burned from hot plates, scarred from broken glass. They were not the hands of an heiress who had never worked a day in her life. Lorenzo's thumb traced a small white burn mark on her index finger, a souvenir from the friar at Sal's last week. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. The temperature in the booth seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Isabella Vanchetti plays the piano," Lorenzo said quietly. "She has insured her hands for $2 million. She uses lotions imported from France." He squeezed her hand tight enough to hurt. "These are not Isabella Vanchetti's hands," he whispered. "These are the hands of a worker, a fighter." Hannah tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. Panic exploded in her chest. The plan was dead. She was dead. "Who are you?" he hissed, his voice lethal. Hannah's mind raced. "Lie, run, scream. Don't lie to me." Lorenzo interrupted his voice, raising slightly enough that the maitre d' outside the curtain paused. "I can smell the cheap soap on you beneath that expensive perfume. I can see the fear in your eyes. Real fear, not the performative anxiety of a spoiled brat." He yanked her closer until their faces were inches apart. She could smell the tobacco and expensive whiskey on his breath. "You're an imposter," he concluded, "and you have made a very fatal mistake coming here to mock me." "I didn't come to mock you," Hannah cried out, the truth spilling out. "I needed the money. She paid me to take her place." Lorenzo paused. He studied her face, searching for the lie. He looked at her dark eyes, wide with terror, her flushed cheeks, the defiant tilt of her chin, despite the fear. Slowly, the corner of his mouth lifted in a dark, predatory smile. It was more terrifying than his anger. "She paid you," he mused. "How much is your life worth, Piccola?" 5,010. "My brother is in trouble," Hannah whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "I just needed the money." Lorenzo released her hand, but he didn't lean back. He kept her pinned with his gaze. "You have courage," he said almost admiringly. "Stupid, suicidal courage. I like that." He picked up his wine glass again, took a slow sip, and checked his watch. "Here is the situation," Lorenzo said calmly. "Outside that door, there are 2 men from the Castellano family watching this table. They are waiting to see if the alliance between the Morettis and the Vanchettis is sealed. If I walk out of here alone, it signals war. If I kill you for insulting me, it signals war." Hannah stopped breathing. "So," Lorenzo continued, his eyes locking onto hers with possessive intensity, "for the next 2 hours and for the foreseeable future, you are Isabella Vanchetti. You will smile, you will eat, and you will wear my ring." "What?" Hannah choked out. "You walked into the lion's den, little mouse," Lorenzo said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a velvet box. He snapped it open to reveal a diamond the size of a knuckle. "Now you have to live in it." He grabbed her hand again, sliding the ring onto her finger. It was loose, cold, and heavy. "You're mine," he said, the finality of the words settling over her like a shroud. "Until I say otherwise." The diamond on Hannah's finger felt heavier than a shackle. It caught the flickering candlelight, refracting it into sharp, mocking beams of white and blue. She stared at it, her breath shallow, unable to look up at the man who had just claimed ownership of her life. "Breathe, Kara." Lorenzo murmured, his voice low enough to be intimate, loud enough to carry to the nearby tables. "You look like you're about to faint. A Vanchetti never faints." Hannah forced air into her lungs. The restaurant Il Segreto buzzed with the quiet, menacing hum of power. She finally looked up. Lorenzo Moretti was watching her with a terrifying mix of amusement and calculation. He looked like a predator playing with a wounded bird before the final snap of the jaw. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, barely moving her lips. Lorenzo picked up his menu, his expression unreadable. "I told you, there are eyes on us. Don't look around." Hannah's instinct was to turn her head, but she froze. "2 tables to your right," Lorenzo narrated softly, his eyes scanning the wine list. "Men in grey suits. They belong to the Castellano family. If they think for 1 second that this union is a sham, they will report back to their boss. And if the Castellanos think the Moretti-Vanchetti alliance is weak, they will attack my shipments by morning. People will die." He lowered the menu, his gunmetal eyes boring into hers. "Do you want blood on your hands, waitress?" Hannah gripped the tablecloth. "My name is Hannah," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. "Not waitress. Hannah." He tested the name, rolling the vowels on his tongue. It sounded obscenely intimate. A pretty name, too soft for this city. Now Hannah, smile. "You are wildly in love with me." She forced the corners of her lips up. It felt like a grimace. The waiter arrived, a ghost in a tuxedo. Lorenzo ordered for both of them, without asking her preference, risotto al tartufo and a bottle of sparkling water. When the food arrived, the smell of black truffle was overwhelming. Hannah's stomach churned. She hadn't eaten since a stale bagel at 600 a.m., but fear was a potent appetite suppressant. "Eat," Lorenzo commanded gently. "I can't," she whispered. "You must." He sliced a piece of bread, buttered it with precise, fluid movements, and placed it on her side plate. "Isabella Vanchetti has a healthy appetite for the finer things. If you sit there, looking like a terrified hostage, you give the game away." Hannah picked up the fork. Her hand shook. She managed to lift a small bite of the rich, creamy rice to her mouth. It tasted like ash. She chewed mechanically, swallowing past the lump in her throat. "Good girl," Lorenzo said. He reached across the table, his hand brushing against her cheek. His fingers were hot, rough against her skin. He tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. To an onlooker, it was a gesture of tender affection. To Hannah, it was a threat. His thumb rested on her pulse point, feeling the frantic rabbit-quick beat of her heart. "You're terrified." He noted his voice dropping to a whisper. "Your heart is beating so fast, I can see it in your neck." "I'm sitting with a murderer," she hissed back, the adrenaline making her reckless. Lorenzo's eyes darkened, but his smile didn't falter. "You're sitting with a businessman, Hannah. But yes, I have killed men who threatened what was mine." His thumb stroked her jawline. "And right now you are mine. That means you are under my protection, but only as long as you play your part." He leaned back, breaking the contact. The loss of his touch left a strange, cold void on her skin. "Tell me about Marco," he said suddenly. Hannah dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china. "How? How did you remember his name? You mentioned him when you were begging. Marco. Bail money. A car theft in Queens." Lorenzo took a sip of his wine, watching her over the rim of the glass. That sounds like the sloppy work of the Russo boys. Is that your last name, Russo? Hannah went pale. Leave him out of this. I can't, Lorenzo said simply. If you are to be my fiancé, I need to know your liabilities. A brother with a criminal record and a gambling problem, that is a liability. He doesn't have a gambling problem, Hannah defended weakly, though she knew it was a lie. Marco bet on everything horses, cards, fights. Everyone in Queens has a gambling problem, Lorenzo dismissed. Finish your wine. We are leaving. Leaving? Hannah felt a fresh wave of panic. Where? To a place where we can discuss the terms of your employment without an audience. He signaled for the check. He didn't look at the bill. He just threw a black American Express card onto the tray. Within minutes, they were standing. Lorenzo moved to her side, his hand sliding around her waist. His grip was firm, possessive, pulling her body flush against his side. Walk with me, he instructed. Lean into me. You adore me. Remember. Hannah's legs felt like jelly. She leaned into him out of necessity, as much as performance. She could feel the hard muscle beneath his suit jacket, the heat radiating from him. They walked through the restaurant, passing the table of the grey-suited men. Lorenzo nodded to them, a curt, icy acknowledgement. The men stared back, their eyes lingering on the massive diamond on Hannah's hand and the way she clung to Lorenzo's arm. Buonasera, gentlemen, Lorenzo said smoothly as they passed. The men didn't speak, but the tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Once they were outside, the cold New York air hit Hannah's face, but it brought no relief. The black Maybach was waiting at the curb, engine purring. The driver opened the rear door. Hannah hesitated on the sidewalk. This was the moment. She could run. She could scream. There were people on the street. Don't even think about it, Lorenzo whispered in her ear, his lips brushing the shell. If you run, the Castellanos will grab you before you make it to the corner. They'll torture you to find out why the engagement is fake. Get in the car, Hannah. She looked at the dark street corner, then at the open door of the car. It was a choice between a wolf and a pack of hyenas. She got in the car. The door slammed shut, sealing them inside the soundproof luxury of the Maybach. The interior smelled of leather and Lorenzo's sandalwood cologne. The partition between them and the driver was up, creating a private airless capsule. Lorenzo didn't move to the other side of the seat. He stayed close to her, his long legs stretching out. He began to undo his cufflinks, his movements slow and deliberate. "Where are you taking me?" Hannah asked. Her voice sounded small in the quiet car. "The diner is on 10th Avenue. You can just drop me there." Lorenzo laughed. It was a dark, dry sound, devoid of humor. "The diner. You think you're going back to scrubbing eggs off plates tonight?" "I have a shift tomorrow morning," Hannah insisted, clinging to the mundane reality of her life as if it were a life raft. "If I don't show up, Sal will fire me." "Consider yourself retired," Lorenzo said. He pulled a sleek black phone from his pocket and tapped the screen. "You are Isabella Vanchetti now. Isabella Vanchetti does not work at Sal's 24-hour diner." "I can't be her," Hannah cried, turning to face him. "Look at me. I don't know which fork to use. I don't know how to speak Italian. I don't know anything about her life. You saw my hands. I'm a fraud." "You're a quick study," Lorenzo countered, his eyes glued to his phone screen. "And you have something Isabella lacks." "What?" "Desperation," he said, finally looking at her. "Desperation makes people very good actors. You have a sick mother. Yes, insulin costs. Hannah felt violated. How do you know that I made a call while you were in the powder room? Hannah Russo, 24 years old, Mother Maria diabetic, brother Marco petty thief. You live in a 2-bedroom walk-up in the Bronx that should have been condemned 10 years ago. You are 3 months behind on rent. He recited the tragedy of her life as if reading a grocery list. Shame burned through her veins hotter than her fear. "Stop it," she whispered. "The check Isabella gave you." Lorenzo pointed at her clutch purse. 5,000 won, 10. Hannah corrected automatically. 5 now, 5 later. $10,000, Lorenzo mused. That covers the rent and the bail. But what about next month? What about the surgery your mother needs for her eyes? Hannah went still. She hadn't told anyone about the retinopathy. You can't know that. I know everything, Hannah. That is why I am the boss, and you are the pawn. The car slowed and turned into a private underground garage. Massive steel gates rolled open. This wasn't a house. It was a fortress. They drove deep into the bowels of a building that looked like it scraped the sky. "Welcome home," Lorenzo said as the car stopped. "This isn't my home," Hannah protested. "It is for now." He opened the door and practically dragged her out. He didn't hold her waist this time. He gripped her elbow, steering her toward a private elevator. He pressed the button for the penthouse. The ride up was silent and painfully long. Hannah watched the floor numbers tick upward. 40 and 54 son. 60. Her ears popped. The doors opened directly into a sprawling living room that looked more like a museum than a home. It was all glass, steel, and black marble. The view of Manhattan was breathtaking, a sea of diamonds against the velvet night, but it felt cold. Lorenzo walked to a crystal decanter on a sidebar and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He downed one in a single swallow and carried the other to her. "Drink," he ordered. "It's whiskey. It will steady your nerves." Hannah took the glass but didn't drink. She stood in the middle of the room, clutching her purse, still wearing the green silk dress that didn't belong to her. "How long?" she asked, her voice cracking. "How long do I have to stay here?" Lorenzo loosened his tie, unbuttoning the top of his shirt to reveal the tanned skin of his throat. He looked tired, the mask of the charming fiancé slipping to reveal the ruthless tactician beneath. "Until the deal with the Vanchettis is signed. 2 weeks, maybe 3. And then. Lorenzo shrugged. "Isabella Vanchetti will have a tragic accident, or perhaps a scandalous breakup. We will decide the narrative later. You will be paid for your time, generously." "And if I refuse?" Hannah asked. "If I walk out that door right now?" Lorenzo set his glass down. He walked over to a sleek coffee table where a tablet lay. He tapped it a few times and then turned it around to face her. On the screen was a live video feed. It was grainy and dark, but Hannah recognized the location immediately. It was the alleyway behind the pool hall in Queens where Marco spent his nights. Marco was there smoking a cigarette, laughing with 2 men. But the men weren't his friends. Hannah recognized them from the restaurant. The grey suits. "Those are Castellano men." Hannah breathed, horror gripping her throat. "No," Lorenzo corrected softly. "Those are my men. But to Marco they are just new friends who are very interested in his gambling debts." He stepped closer, invading her space until she had to crane her neck to look at him. "Marco owes $30,000 to a loan shark in Jersey," Lorenzo revealed. "I bought his debt 10 minutes ago. I own him, Hannah, which means I own you." Hannah felt the room spin. The trap snapped shut. There was no way out. If she left, Marco died. If she stayed, she was sleeping in the devil's bed. "You're a monster," she whispered, tears finally spilling over her lashes. Lorenzo reached out and caught a tear with his thumb. He didn't wipe it away. He smeared it across her cheekbone like war paint. "I am a king," he corrected her, his voice devoid of pity. "And a king does whatever is necessary to protect his kingdom. You walked into my court, Hannah. You took the money, you put on the dress, you sat at the table." He leaned down his face inches from hers. His eyes dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. "You wanted to save your family, fine. This is how you do it. You play the role. You warm my bed. You wear my ring. And you do not leave this penthouse unless I am by your side." He stepped back, gesturing to a hallway. "Second door on the left is the guest suite. There are clothes in the closet, Isabella's size, unfortunately, but you'll make do. Sleep. We have a press conference in the morning." Hannah stood rooted to the spot, shivering. "Go!" Lorenzo barked the command, cracking like a whip. She flinched and turned, running toward the hallway. She found the room, slammed the door, and locked it. It was futile. It was his house, his lock. But it was the only barrier she had. She sank to the floor, the emerald dress pooling around her, like a puddle of envy and greed. She looked at the ring again. It wasn't just heavy anymore. It was burning. She was trapped in the sky with a man who had bought her brother's life for pocket change. And the scariest part wasn't that he was a monster. The scariest part was the way her skin still tingled where he had touched her face. Sunlight didn't gently wake Hannah. It assaulted her. It streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the guest suite, bouncing off white marble and chrome, demanding attention. She lay still for a moment, buried under a duvet that likely cost more than her entire education, trying to remember why her chest felt so heavy. Then the memory of gunmetal eyes and a diamond shackle rushed back. She wasn't Hannah Russo, the waitress who scraped by on tips. She was a prisoner in a glass castle. A sharp knock on the door made her jump. Before she could answer, the door swung open. Lorenzo didn't believe in privacy. He was already dressed impeccable in a charcoal suit that emphasized the width of his shoulders. He looked fresh, rested, and predatory. He held a tablet in one hand and a garment bag in the other. "Get up," he said, tossing the bag onto the bed. "The glam squad will be here in 15 minutes. You look like a wreck." Hannah sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. Her hair was a tangled mess, and her eyes were puffy from crying herself to sleep. "Good morning to you too, Lorenzo." He stopped at the foot of the bed, his gaze raking over her disheveled form with clinical detachment. "Isabella Vanchetti wakes up looking like a goddess. You have work to do." "I'm not her," Hannah snapped, the fight returning to her, despite the fear. "And no amount of makeup is going to change the fact that I don't know the first thing about being a sanitation heiress." Lorenzo stepped closer, the air in the room seemingly thinning. "Then you better learn fast. Today is the press luncheon to announce the merger between Moretti Logistics and Vanchetti Waste Management. The press will be there. My rivals will be there. And your father will be there." Hannah's blood ran cold. "My father. Isabella's father. He'll know. He'll take one look at me and know I'm not his daughter." Lorenzo smirked a cruel twist of lips. "Vito Vanchetti is currently in a private hospital in Zurich, recovering from a stroke, which is code for drying out his liver. He won't be there, but his consigliere Marcus Thorne will be. Thorne has known Isabella since she was in diapers. He is the test. He'll expose me, Hannah whispered. He won't, Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to that lethal whisper. Because Thorne is on my payroll. He knows about the switch. He helped orchestrate it. Hannah stared at him, the depth of the corruption making her dizzy. Isabella didn't hire me to escape a date. She hired me to escape you. Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. Smart girl. Isabella is weak. She fled to Mexico with a bartender. She thinks she's free. She doesn't realize that by leaving she handed her family's empire to me. And you are the key to the lock. He checked his watch. Shower. Scrub the diner off your skin. If I smell fryer grease on you today, I will add another 5,000 to Marco's debt. Three hours later, Hannah stood in front of a full-length mirror, unable to recognize the woman staring back. The team of stylists Lorenzo had hired worked with the efficiency of a pit crew. They had waxed, polished, and painted her. Her dark hair was blown out into cascading waves that looked effortlessly expensive. Her makeup was flawless, highlighting her cheekbones and making her eyes look larger, darker. She wore a cream-colored sheath dress by Victoria Beckham that hugged her curves but remained modest, paired with nude Louboutins. On her finger, the engagement ring blazed. Perfection. Lorenzo's voice came from the doorway. He walked in, dismissing the stylists with a wave of his hand. They scurried out like frightened mice. Lorenzo circled her, inspecting their work. He reached out and adjusted the neckline of her dress by a millimeter. His knuckles grazed her collarbone, sending a jolt of electricity down her spine that she resented. You look the part, he admitted. Now the script. If anyone asks about your charity work, you support ocean conservation. If they ask about your education, you studied art history at NYU, but took a leave of absence. And if Thorne asks you about Uncle Sal, you say, I say he's a dusty old relic who needs to retire. Hannah recited the line he had drilled into her over breakfast. Good. Lorenzo offered his arm. Showtime, Principessa. The luncheon was held at the Pierre Hotel. The ballroom was a sea of photographers, reporters, and men in dark suits who looked like they carried weapons under their jackets. When Lorenzo walked in with Hannah on his arm, the flashbulbs went off like a strobe light explosion. It was blinding. Hannah flinched, her grip on Lorenzo's arm tightening. Smile, he murmured through his teeth, smiling brilliantly at the cameras. You adore the attention. Hannah forced a smile, her face aching. They moved through the crowd, Lorenzo navigating the shark tank with ease. He shook hands, clapped shoulders, and introduced her as, my beautiful fiancée, Isabella. Hannah nodded, laughed at jokes she didn't hear, and sipped champagne she didn't want. She felt like a doll, stiff and hollow. Lorenzo! A voice boomed through the noise. A man approached them, older, with silver hair and a face carved from granite. He wore a suit that cost more than Hannah's childhood home. Marcus Thorne. Lorenzo greeted him, his tone cordial but his body tense. And the little runaway returns, Marcus said, turning his gaze to Hannah. His eyes were full blue and sharp as tacks. He looked her up and down, searching for a flaw in the design. Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the man who had known Isabella since she was a baby. Even if he was paid off. The scrutiny felt physical. Hello, Marcus, Hannah said, trying to mimic the haughty boredom of the upper class. You look different, Izzy, Marcus said, stepping closer. New nose. Hannah froze. Was this a trap just better contouring Marcus? Lorenzo interjected smoothly, his arm tightening around Hannah's waist. And happiness? Love does wonders for the complexion. Marcus didn't look at Lorenzo. He kept his eyes on Hannah. I heard you were playing the piano again. We have a Steinway on the stage. Why don't you play Clair de Lune for us? For old times' sake. Panic seized Hannah's throat. She couldn't play chopsticks, let alone Debussy. Hannah stammered. She'd love to, a voice from behind them said. Hannah turned to see a man she didn't know. He was younger than Marcus, with slicked-back hair and a cruel smile. He was a Castellano. She knew it instinctively. Unless, of course, the Castellano man sneered, her hands are too busy shaking. The room seemed to go quiet. All eyes were on her. Lorenzo's body was rigid against hers. If she refused, she looked weak. If she accepted, she was exposed. Hannah looked at the piano, then at the Castellano's smug face. She thought about the diner. She thought about the rude customers she dealt with at 300 a.m. who tried to stiff her on the tip. A strange, cold anger replaced her fear. She let go of Lorenzo's arm and took a step toward the Castellano man. She looked him dead in the eye, channeling every ounce of frustration she had swallowed for 24 years. I don't perform on command like a circus animal, Hannah said, her voice clear and dripping with disdain. Especially not for the Castellanos. My hands are insured for $2 million. I don't risk them on hotel pianos that haven't been tuned since the 90s. She turned to Lorenzo, lifting her chin. Get me a drink, darling. This conversation is boring me. Silence. Absolute silence. Then Marcus Thorne threw his head back and laughed. That's the Vanchetti fire I missed, that is he. The tension broke. The Castellano man looked furious, his jaw working, but he retreated into the crowd. Lorenzo guided her toward the bar, his hand sliding down to the small of her back. He leaned down, his lips grazing her ear. That, he whispered, sending a shiver through her, that had nothing to do with fear, was magnificent. For the first time, Hannah felt a flicker of power. She wasn't just a waitress in a costume. She was playing the game. And she was winning. The high of the victory at the Pierre faded the moment they stepped out of the hotel. The sky had turned a bruised purple, heavy with impending rain. The valet brought the Maybach around. Lorenzo's head of security, a massive man named Dante, opened the rear door. Straight to the penthouse, Lorenzo ordered Dante, who was driving today. Take the FDR. I want to avoid the midtown traffic. Yes, boss. They slid into the back seat. The door sealed them in. Lorenzo loosened his tie immediately, exhaling a long breath. He looked at Hannah. Really looked at her with a strange intensity. You surprised me today, he admitted. I thought you would crumble under Thorne. I hate bullies, Hannah muttered, kicking off her heels. She rubbed her aching feet. And that guy had bully written all over him. That was Luca Castellano, and yes, he is a bully. He's also a sadist. Lorenzo reached into the mini-fridge and pulled out a bottle of water, handing it to her. You handled him better than the real Isabella would have. She would have cried. I don't have the luxury of crying, Hannah said, cracking the seal. When you're poor, crying doesn't fix anything. It just gives you a headache. Lorenzo watched her drink. The atmosphere in the car was shifting. The danger of the afternoon had created a strange bond between them, the camaraderie of soldiers who survived a skirmish. You think I don't know struggle? Hannah, Lorenzo asked quietly. My father was a kingpin, yes, but I was the one who had to earn the crown. I was shot for the first time when I was 16. I spent a year in a hole in Sicily, hiding from a vendetta. Hannah looked at him, seeing the scar on his eyebrow in a new light. Is that why you're so cold? Practice. Lorenzo's eyes softened just a fraction. Ice preserves, Hannah. Heat destroys. He reached out his hand, hesitating before touching her hair. He carefully pulled a hairpin out, letting a dark curl fall against her neck. The intimacy was suffocating. Lorenzo, she breathed, not sure if she was warning him or inviting him. Boss? Dante's voice from the front seat was a roar. Bogies, 6 o'clock. The car swerved violently to the left. Hannah was thrown against the door. Crack. The rear window shattered. It wasn't a rock. It was a bullet. Get down, Lorenzo shouted. He didn't just tell her. He threw himself over her. His heavy body pinned her to the leather seat as the world exploded. Automatic gunfire raked the side of the Maybach. The armored plating held the worst of it, but the noise was deafening like hail on a tin roof magnified 1,000 times. Dante. Get us out of here, Lorenzo yelled. They boxed us in 2 SUVs, Dante shouted back, spinning the wheel. The heavy car slammed into another vehicle, metal screeching against metal. Hannah squeezed her eyes shut, screaming into the leather seat. She could smell the gunpowder now, acrid and metallic. She could feel Lorenzo's heart pounding against her back, not fast like a rabbit, but heavy and hard like a war drum. Stay down, Lorenzo commanded. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a handgun. He didn't look scared. He looked focused. Another impact shook the car harder this time. The Maybach spun out, tires smoking, and slammed into a concrete divider. The airbag deployed in the front with a cloud of dust. Dante, Lorenzo called out. Silence from the front. Dante, Lorenzo cursed in Italian. He grabbed Hannah's arm, his grip bruising. We have to move. The car is dead. If we stay here, we're sitting ducks. I can't, Hannah sobbed. I can't move. You move or you die. Lorenzo roared, his face inches from hers. There was a cut on his cheek from the glass, bleeding freely. Look at me, Hannah. I will not let them take you. But you have to run. He kicked the door open. The chaotic noise of the highway rushed in horns, screams, and more gunfire. Lorenzo dragged her out of the wreckage. The rain had started cold and biting. They were on the shoulder of the FDR drive. 2 black SUVs were stopped 50 yards back, men pouring out of them with weapons drawn. Go over the barrier. Lorenzo shoved her toward the concrete wall separating the highway from the service road below. It's too high. Jump! Lorenzo turned and fired 3 shots in rapid succession. One of the approaching men dropped. Hannah scrambled over the barrier. It was a 10-foot drop to a grassy embankment. She fell rolling in the mud, ruining the dress, scraping her skin. Lorenzo landed beside her a second later, cat-like. He grabbed her hand again. Run! Under the bridge! They ran. Hannah had lost her shoes. She ran barefoot through glass and gravel, the adrenaline numbing the pain. They scrambled down the embankment, slipping in the mud, toward the dark underpass of the bridge. The gunfire continued behind them, but the traffic on the highway was creating chaos, blocking the pursuers. They reached the shadows of the underpass. It smelled of urine and wet concrete. Lorenzo didn't stop. He navigated a chain-link fence, lifting a loose corner for her to crawl under, then following her. They were in an abandoned construction lot, now hidden from the road. Only then did Lorenzo stop. He slammed back against a concrete pillar, sliding down until he was sitting on the dirty ground. Are we safe? Hannah gasped, clutching her chest. Her beautiful cream dress was black with mud and speckled with blood. "For a moment," Lorenzo rasped. His voice sounded wet. Hannah looked down at him. "Lorenzo!" He was clutching his left side. Blood was seeping between his fingers, dark and fast, staining his white shirt crimson. "You're shot," Hannah whispered, horror dawning on her. "Just a scratch," Lorenzo grunted, trying to stand and failing. He slumped back, through and through, missed the vitals. "You're bleeding to death." Hannah dropped to her knees beside him. The anger, the fear of him, the hatred, it all vanished, replaced by the terrifying reality that he was the only thing standing between her and the men with machine guns. "Phone," Lorenzo wheezed, pointing to his pocket. "Burner, speed dial 1. Hannah dug into his pocket, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the cheap plastic phone. She pressed 1. "Yeah," a gruff voice answered. "Lorenzo is shot!" Hannah screamed. "We're under the bridge near the 34th Street exit. The construction site. We're tracking the phone. 5 minutes. Keep pressure on it." The line went dead. Hannah looked at the wound. It was bubbling. She remembered her first aid training from the restaurant apply pressure. "This is going to hurt," she sobbed. She pressed her hands directly onto the bullet hole. Lorenzo roared in pain, his head thrashing back against the concrete. His hand shot out and gripped her wrist, squeezing tight enough to snap bone. But he didn't push her away. "Talk to me," he gritted out, his eyes squeezing shut. "Distract me." I hate your suit," Hannah babbled, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "It's too tight, and you're arrogant, and you kidnapped me." Lorenzo let out a strained, breathless laugh. "Tell me something. Real." Hannah pressed harder on the wound, feeling the warm blood pumping against her palms. "My real name is Hannah. My favorite color is yellow because it reminds me of the sun, and I never see the sun because I work night shifts. I want to go to culinary school, not play piano." Lorenzo opened his eyes. They were hazy, losing focus, but fixed on her. "Yellow," he murmured. "It suits you better than green." His grip on her wrist loosened. His hand slid down to lace his fingers with hers, slippery with his own blood. "Hannah." He whispered the name, sounding like a prayer on his dying lips. "If they get here first, take the gun. Don't let them take you alive." "Shut up," Hannah cried. "You're not dying. You don't get to die and leave me here. You're mine." He mumbled, his eyes fluttering closed. "Even in hell, you're mine." Headlights swept across the construction site. Tires crunched on gravel. Hannah grabbed the gun lying in the mud beside him. She raised it toward the approaching lights, her hands trembling, ready to shoot anyone who wasn't Dante. The door of the SUV flew open. "Boss?" It was Dante. Alive. Bleeding from the head, but alive. Hannah dropped the gun and collapsed over Lorenzo's chest, sobbing hysterically as the darkness finally took her. The steady, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the master bedroom. It had been converted into a sterile trauma unit, smelling of antiseptic and steel, masking the lingering scent of sandalwood that usually permeated the room. Hannah sat in a velvet armchair pulled close to the bed. She had scrubbed the mud and blood from her skin, but the memory of it was stained into her psyche. She wore one of Lorenzo's oversized dress shirts, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. She hadn't left his side in 3 days. On the bed, Lorenzo Moretti looked mortal for the first time. His chest was wrapped in thick bandages, his skin pale against the dark sheets. But his breathing was steady. His eyelids fluttered. Hannah leaned forward, her heart leaping into her throat. "Lorenzo," she whispered. His eyes opened. They were hazy for a moment before sharpening into that familiar, penetrating gunmetal gaze. He looked around the room, assessing threats, before his eyes landed on her. "Hannah," he rasped. His voice was like gravel. "I'm here," she said, reaching out to cover his hand. "You're safe. Dante got us out. The doctor said the bullet missed the artery by 2 centimeters. Lorenzo tried to squeeze her hand, his grip weak but determined. "And you... did they hurt you?" "I'm fine," she said, though her bruised knees and the scratches on her arms told a different story. Lorenzo let out a long breath, his head sinking back into the pillow. "The contract," he murmured. Hannah stiffened. "What? The deal?" Lorenzo said, his eyes locking onto hers. "It's void. You saved my life, Hannah. A Moretti pays his debts. Your brother's debt is cleared. The money is yours. You are free to go." The silence that followed was deafening. Hannah looked at the door. It was unlocked. She could walk out right now. She could go back to the Bronx, pay her rent, and disappear. She could go back to scraping eggs off plates and hiding from loan sharks. But she looked down at her hand. She was still wearing the ring. And then she looked at the man in the bed, the man who had thrown his body over hers to shield her from bullets, the monster who had protected her when it mattered most. She realized with a terrifying clarity that the waitress from the diner was dead. She had died under that bridge in the rain. Hannah stood up. She walked to the bedside table, poured a glass of water, and held the straw to Lorenzo's lips. He drank greedily. "I can't go back," she said softly. "Why?" Lorenzo asked, watching her. "You hate this world. You hate me." "I hated the idea of you," Hannah corrected. She placed the glass down and sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to jar his wound. "But you didn't treat me like a pawn on that highway. You treated me like a partner." She reached out and brushed the hair off his forehead. "Marco is safe," she asked. "Protected 24/7, Lorenzo promised. "No one touches him." "And the Vanchettis?" Thorne was impressed. "The merger goes through on Monday." Hannah nodded slowly. She looked at the ring again. It didn't feel like a shackle anymore. It felt like armor. "Then I have a press conference to prepare for," Hannah said, her voice steady. "I can't let my fiancé face the cameras alone while he's recovering." Lorenzo stared at her, a slow disbelief warring with triumph in his eyes. He reached up his hand, cupping the back of her neck, pulling her down until their foreheads rested together. "There is no turning back, Cara," he warned, his voice a low rumble. "If you stay, you are in the war. Forever." "I know," Hannah whispered. She closed the distance, pressing her lips to his. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was a seal, a promise. "I'm not afraid of the war," she breathed against his lips. "As long as I'm winning it." Lorenzo smiled, the predator returning to his eyes. "Then rule with me." And that is the story of how a simple waitress named Hannah walked into a trap and came out a queen. What started as a desperate lie for $5,000 became a battle for survival in the highest echelons of the New York underworld. It forces us to ask, what are we truly capable of when our backs are against the wall? Hannah didn't just survive Lorenzo Moretti. She matched him. She proved that power isn't just about money or guns. It's about the courage to stand your ground when the world is burning around you. In the end, she didn't just win the game. She rewrote the rules. Thank you for listening to this story. Now I have a question for you. If you were in Hannah's shoes, would you have taken the freedom and ran back to your old life, or would you have stayed to rule beside the boss? Let me know your choice in the comments below. If you enjoyed this twisty Mafia romance, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next part of our storytelling series. See you in the next video.